Breaking news out of the NFL, where the league office is appealing Deshaun Watson's 6-game suspension. The Players Association will now have 2 days to respond to that appeal. Deshaun Watson suspended those 6 games for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy. Commissioner Roger Goodell will now determine who will hear the NFL's appeal of Deshaun Watson's suspension. Let's welcome in NFL insider Jonathan Jones here. JJ, we were waiting to see if the NFL was going to indeed appeal the suspension. And in fact, they are. What's the latest?
Well, the latest is that, yes, they are going to file that appeal. They have notified the NFLPA that they are going to do that the NFLPA has until Friday to respond to that appeal. Really a procedural thing, not anything that anyone paying close attention to this as a fan needs to really concern themselves with. The concern really, and the main question that you're going to have, that many people have, is, okay, how long is this appeal process going to last? I've talked with sources both in the NFL League office and with the NFLPA. Both have told me there is no timetable for that. And so because of that, what we have is in the CBA, it is, hey, it can be expedited. The process will be an expedited process, but really that's all that we have in terms of timing. I can tell you the vibe has been, certainly from the league office perspective, that they would love to have this all sewn up before the start of the NFL season. Folks at the Cleveland Browns would also like that. I'm told Deshaun Watson's camp, of course, would like that as well. And so what can the league do upon this appeal? Well, Roger Goodell can hear it, or he can appoint his designee, as you mentioned, Amanda. And that person can increase, modify, perhaps even reduce that 6-game suspension. That's in there. No one is expecting a reduction in this 6-game suspension. And so that's what we're faced with right now, as the NFL has filed that appeal with Deshaun Watson's 6-game suspension.
So, JJ, I mean, people weren't really sure. I mean, initially, a lot of people thought it was going to be a year, and then we heard closer and closer to the decision that it was going to be about 6 games or so. It wasn't going to be that full year length. And as you mentioned, it could potentially be reduced. Nobody is expecting that. They are expecting games to be added on to this, or to ask to be added on. How many games potentially now could we be looking at? Are you hearing any sort of number?
No, I'm not hearing any number. This is unprecedented, Amanda, in any number of ways. Judge Sue Robinson, in her report, the 16-page report, essentially talked about how the NFL said that this was unprecedented. She said that this was egregious behavior that she hadn't seen in the NFL in terms of other cases that she had looked at as it related to sexual assault. And so it's hard to say, because this is also a new process with the CBA that was signed in March of 2020. This is the first time that it's gone to the arbiter first, and then the NFL can appeal. Back in the day, of course, the sort of process was flipped, where it was the NFL heard it, and Roger Goodell heard it, handed down his punishment, and if the player didn't like it, it would then go to appeal. You mentioned adding games. I think a number of folks would say, all right, add 2 games, and maybe it's 8. I think that right now that is maybe the thought process that's going on. I will say that the NFL had been pushing for an indefinite suspension of Deshaun Watson of at least 1 year. That would mean that he would not play for the Cleveland Browns in 2022, and that in the offseason he would have to apply for reinstatement. Roger Goodell would hear that reinstatement application and then determine whether he would then be able to play in 2023. The other part that is possible here is that a fine is involved, that you don't necessarily add games, but that there is a fine that is involved. We know that there was no fine with Deshaun Watson, that his 6 game checks, if the suspension were to hold, would be stripped from him, but with a base salary of just over $1 million, you're talking about a third of $1 million at that point, a little more than $300,000. And so that is also a possibility here. So it's really hard right now to prognosticate what exactly is the NFL going to do, especially because we don't yet know if Roger Goodell, the commissioner, is going to hear that, or if he is going to appoint someone to hear this appeal.
So we initially had Judge Sue Robinson there, and I know you touched on it at the top, but because it is a little murky, walk us through who could potentially be hearing this appeal.
That's a great question. It could be Roger Goodell or someone he appoints, but because this is such an unprecedented situation, no one really knows who that appointee would be. One could assume it would be someone who would be favorable to the NFL, because in this process, they got a third-party arbiter who, according to the NFLPA and Deshaun Watson, felt that Judge Sue Robinson was down the line. And so we don't have those names just yet of who it could be, but obviously who it would be. If it's Goodell or someone else who sort of has a track record with the league, then we could sort of make determinations based off that.
JJ, when this initial suspension came out, there was a lot of reaction to it, many of it negative, many people feeling like it should have been more games. How much pressure is on the NFL, even if it is a third party who is going to look at this, potentially adding more games? I mean, how much pressure is it there to make sure this looks right? I don't really know how to frame that, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
I totally understand what you're saying. And right now, the NFL, they are faced with two issues. First of all, the NFL has the power. They have the hammer. If they want to fix any short-term issue, they can do so in the short term. They have to consider the long term. They do have to consider precedent here. And so if the NFL wants to appeal this and give Deshaun Watson the year-long indefinite suspension, they have the right, according to the collective bargaining agreement, to do that. If that were to happen, I would imagine that Deshaun Watson and his legal representation would then file in federal court, but that could take some time. So, we're sort of getting off into the woods on that and a little step ahead. But your question about the sort of line that the NFL has to toe here, where if they want to be perceived as, quote unquote, being tough on crime and they care about women, for example, well, the 6-game suspension is far shorter than what the NFL was hoping to get with this potential punishment. But meanwhile, what you have here is a neutral third party who heard the facts of the case as they were presented. Everyone had their day in court, had 3 days in that hearing a couple of months ago. And so now what you're going to be faced with is showing people that, oh, no, we don't like that ruling that was by a neutral third party. We're not going to throw it into our own kangaroo court. And I believe that players, agents, representation, they would view it as that, and I believe that because that's what they have told me over the past couple of days. Does the league actually care about that? I don't know, and they may, but if in the long term you're worried about how the players are going to perceive the league, that, hey, we, again, had a neutral third party hear this out, according to our own collective bargaining agreement, this was the punishment, let it lie, but instead you then use your power, and again, the players agreed to this, but then you use your power to get whatever you wanted, and it sort of never mattered in the first place. That long term is not at all going to sit well, and frankly, it could set a bad precedent for NFL punishment against its players and against its owners moving forward.
Jonathan Jones, thank you so much there. I know you're going to be working the phones and talking to a lot of people on this as this just continues to move along in this process. JJ out there at Broncos training camp, CBS Sports HQ. We're going around the country. Make sure to tune in tomorrow for the Bengals. Let's check in on Joe Burrow, see how they're doing, and Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs Thursday. Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.